Today on Listen Up, Egypt in great change. Citizens revolt and the government reacts. What does it mean for the future and for faith in the Mideast? We'll ask. That's next. Welcome to Listen Up, the show that explores current affairs from a Christian perspective. I'm Lorna Dueck. For the citizens of Egypt, they were 18 extraordinary days. The demand to do justice and love mercy could no longer be ignored. Egypt, with its teeming population of 80 million, where 20 million live on less than $2 a day, demanded change. Economic gains had benefited mainly the upper class, and youth unemployment erupted. Economic hopes were unfulfilled. 10,000 political prisoners, repressed freedoms, police brutality. It all resulted in a collapsing of the government of President Hosni Mubarak. Egyptians, both Christian and Muslim, will have their say on the program today about the future of their country. But we begin with a veteran correspondent of the area, Patrick Martin, who was in Cairo with a front row seat, except for when he was detained by police for a brief time during the 18 days of the revolution. Patrick Martin, Mideast Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, thank you for joining Listen Up.
My pleasure.
Patrick, could we start with the revolutionary slogan, "The people, the army, one hand"? Help us understand civilian trust in the military of Egypt to lead them to democracy.
Yeah, it was quite extraordinary because when the army moved in, the protesters applauded. And all through the protests, they were clearly identifying with the army as partners in this. And the slogan towards the end, when they knew the showdown was there, was this one, "The people, the army, one hand." They would raise their hand up together. They'd do this motion where they were chanting. And it was really powerful. I think it came from 1952 when the army really overthrew the monarchy in Egypt. The identification then was so strong because the army needed public support and the people supported them.
The Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, which now rules, has only met 3 times in all of Egypt's history. How will they be able to communicate like the revolution has demanded?
Yeah, they've met, as I understand it, during these changes of leadership. After that, then it's just a regular hierarchical command system. But when there's been this crunch, when Sadat, for example, was assassinated, they met at that time. Other times, similarly, when Nasser died and so on, to choose the next president, it tends to have been their role to choose the president. This time they're choosing the president as well, but through this very difficult system called democracy, which they say they're supporting. They sure chose to get rid of Mr. Mubarak. It was very much an army decision that for the best interest of the country, they would take this action. But I think that communicating with the people is going to be very difficult because you may have seen some videos of this spokesman with his baseball cap and he looks very stern. And, this is not something that people readily relate to, that kind of communication. And it's certainly not the system that they're looking for. They are trusting that over these next few months, there will evolve a system of democracy that they will find, tolerable.
Will the new constitution be drafted on secularism?
Yeah, I think so. That seems to be the tendency. The Muslim Brotherhood even has indicated that they do not want to have any kind of religious state. This is not their goal. They said that during the Prophet Muhammad's time, there was not a religious state. They believe in a secular state too, but with religious principles being applied and a role for them in the political system. There is no force in that country that really wants to have some kind of theocratic state created. No credible, substantial force anyway.
Patrick, what are people hoping the ingredients will be of this hoped-for civil society in Egypt?
Well, it's more than just, of course, free elections. That's been a big slogan, but really they want freedom of assembly, freedom of press, freedom of expression. They want the basic freedoms so that there will be a civil society that will function.
Remind us of the economic and social realities that Egyptians are now recovering from first, though.
40% of that population are below the poverty line, which means they're subsisting on very little every day. They're dependent on subsidized food, subsidized fuel, all kinds of things just to make their basic ends meet. And they're the people around the edges of Cairo who try to get some work to survive, people throughout the countryside who are living on farm and subsistence agriculture. This is the nature, the first segment. You have then a 50% swath of the people, I'd say, that are broadly middle class. Most of those are lower middle class working people. Some are what we would recognize in the West as more middle class, more educated, a little more sophisticated. Perhaps they've traveled outside the country. And then, of course, you have the 10% at the top that have been creaming off most of the money these last few years, and that was really the cause for this revolution.
You know, we saw all faiths and all genders side by side in this revolution. Will it last?
It will in certain parts of society. There's no question that the people on the street at the very beginning were predominantly secular, but they were men and women marching and protesting together. I saw them march together into waves of tear gas. It's made me cry, as I've never cried, and I've tasted a lot of tear gas. It was strong. Men and women marched into those clouds until they were overcome. Then another wave would come. That bonded, I think, that part of society that were the protesters into a bond that will always be there, I believe. Then you have, I think, the poor in society who continue to separate the roles. And I'd say in that level and in the lowest of the middle class, you will still have among Muslims an anti-Christian sentiment. There's just no getting around it. There are people in that society who believe that Christians are unfairly benefiting by their community's interests.
Patrick Martin, Mideast Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Next, Listen Up moves to hear the concerns of both Muslim and Christian as they watch Egypt go through its historic change.
And this is an indication and a proof that Muslims have nothing against Christians and Christians have nothing against Muslims.